I'm Katrien Devolder. This is the Practical Ethics channel.
I think a defining feature of passive-aggressive behaviour is it's ambiguous. On the one hand, being passive-aggressive involves expressing sort of negative attitudes covertly, but on the other hand, it's so covert that there is a plausible interpretation of the behaviour according to which it's perfectly innocuous.
This time I'll be talking to Dr Rebecca Roache, Senior Lecturer at Royal Holloway, University of London. Rebecca is about to publish a book with OUP on the philosophy of swearing, but this time we'll be talking about another interesting topic she's been working on, passive aggression. So Rebecca, could you give us an example of a standard case of passive aggression?
Parvati is getting married, and at her wedding reception she encounters an old acquaintance of hers, Bruna, who has recently got divorced. And Bruna coolly appraises Parvati up and down and says, "Parvati, that's an interesting outfit you're wearing today." Now, if you say that to a bride on her wedding day, that's not complimentary. That if someone were to say that to you, you would probably think that it was a veiled insult. And yet on the surface, there's actually nothing obviously offensive about that remark.
So what is special about passive aggression? What makes it different from other types of aggression?
I think a defining feature of passive-aggressive behaviour is it's ambiguous. So on the one hand, being passive-aggressive involves expressing sort of negative attitudes covertly, but on the other hand, it's so covert that there is a plausible interpretation of the behaviour according to which it's perfectly innocuous. And the person being passive-aggressive can always retreat to that if they're challenged on their behaviour. To use the example again that I mentioned earlier, where Bruna tells Parvati on her wedding day that she's wearing a very interesting outfit. I mean, how is Parvati to challenge that behaviour? Typically, we might expect her to do something like, what do you mean? What exactly do you mean when you say that my outfit is interesting? And at that point, Bruna might, unless she is willing to justify her behaviour, she could say something like, I just meant it's sort of very, very beautiful fabric, or something along these lines, something according to which it's a perfectly innocuous or even complimentary comment. And then Parvati is going to look like a fool. So passive aggression always has this sort of veneer of innocence. And it doesn't have to be, I don't think that sort of innocent interpretation has to be rock solid. It could be in that example that Parvati could successfully get Bruna to admit that she was insulting Parvati. But she would have to do that through sort of quite a long conversation about this is how people typically use the word interesting, and this is how you've just used it, and we sort of perhaps reference to contextual factors. But sort of socially, in that context, when people are having a kind of light-hearted exchange at a wedding, that's just not going to happen. So the innocent explanation for the passive-aggressive behaviour that the passive-aggressive person has the option of retreating to doesn't have to be something that's watertight. It just has to be something that they are sort of reasonably confident that in the context they find themselves, they can mention as a way to diffuse any criticism of them.
Isn't passive aggression a bit of a misnomer? I mean, why is it called passive aggression?
So I think it's passive in that way, that it doesn't engage with the expression of the negative attitudes. It doesn't say to the passive aggressive person doesn't say to the target, "I'm annoyed with you" or "I resent you for these reasons." You sometimes find that people, when they are describing somebody's passive aggressive behaviour, will say things like, if they're annoyed with me, why don't they come out and say it? Why don't they sort of insult me even? And if we kind of feel that would be more honest. And I think the reason we feel like that is because then we've got something to work with. If somebody insults you, then you can respond to that and defend yourself and find out why they feel the way they do and so on. But you can't do that with passive aggression. It somehow sort of shuts down a conversation about what the passive aggressive person is upset about.
Is passive aggression always a bad way of venting one's anger or frustrations?
When I first started thinking about this topic, my position was that it's always better not to be passive aggressive. It's better to express our negative feelings explicitly And in some cases, it's better to swear at people than to be passive aggressive to them, just because then you can have this exchange of, you can have this conversation about what the problem is. And also the person who's being passive aggressive gets the opportunity to vent their negative feelings in a more satisfying manner. But actually, I think while that's true in some cases, in other cases that's not going to work. If you are in an unsatisfying job, say, and your employer is making too many demands of you, like really sort of demanding your time, you're spending far too much time at work, it's stressing you out, but you don't really have any route by which you complain. Maybe you don't have very good job security, so you're not in a position where you can confidently address these problems with your employer. That would be a situation in which you're sort of fairly trapped, and passive aggression might just be the only way of expressing your negative feelings.
So passive aggression is unavoidable and sometimes the best option then.
Part of it might be it's the price you pay for having norms of politeness, because it actually wouldn't be nice if everyone went round just venting their annoyance, which may not even be justified, right? Like, I might be annoyed with you and you've done nothing wrong, it's just I'm in a bad mood. Like, if I kind of go, fuck you, Katrien, then like that, I mean, that would be bad, right, if everyone doing that. So we kind of have these rules about, you have to swallow your feelings a lot of the time. And like, if we're kind of really annoyed, then it's just really hard to do that.
Yeah. It's sometimes said that women are more often than men passive aggressive. Do you think there's something to that?
I think there is this perception of women as being more passive aggressive than men. And I'm not sure how accurate that is. I don't know whether anybody's actually sort of gone out and measured this in any way. If I had to speculate, I might say that it will probably be linked to the fact that culturally, strong emotion is more acceptable when it's expressed by men than when it's expressed by women. Men, when they get very emotional in politics, for example, are often described as passionate in situations where women would have been seen as losing control. So I think that, given that puts a sort of pressure on women to swallow strong emotion, to resist expressing it, and that would be a plausible explanation, I think, of if it is the case that women are more passive aggressive than men, that women are led to think that we can't express strong emotion, and so it has to go somewhere. We can't always swallow our emotions, and then it might be directed into passive aggressive behaviour.
Is there a take-home message? I mean, what's generally worse, swearing or being passive aggressive?
I think it's definitely more satisfying to swear at people in general, but we can't always do that. I think so. Personally, what I try to do is, I do have a tendency to be passive aggressive, like lots of other people, and I do try to reflect on whether this is the best way to express my feelings, whether I could do so more constructively and even explicitly. But I don't always succeed. I think it is just hard to express all our grievances openly, especially when there's some grievances that we don't feel able to express, we don't feel entitled to, we feel like we might have an unsympathetic response, or just sort of norms of politeness require us to just keep everything running smoothly, not sort of rock the boat with any sort of displays of strong emotion. So in those situations, it can be very difficult to justify kind of explicit displays of annoyance, and assuming that annoyance has to go somewhere. I think sometimes passive aggression is difficult to avoid.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to the Practical Ethics channel.